Welcome to this video presentation on the Healthy and Resilient Gulf of Mexico 2021 Request for Applications from EPA's Gulf of Mexico Division. The purpose of this presentation is to assist anyone who applies to the 2021 RFA funding opportunities to be well informed as to how to develop the best application they can. This presentation will highlight some information from the RFA and provide a strategy for getting started. This presentation should not be used in place of reading or following instructions in the RFA, as this is not meant to be an all-encompassing presentation and only outlines portions of the RFA. This presentation will touch on the following items listed here: EPA's Gulf of Mexico Division, what's new in the request for applications, getting started, project narrative and tips, developing your own budget table, evaluation criteria, submitting your application, selection process, helpful resources, and questions. What is the EPA Gulf of Mexico Division? GMD is one of the EPA's Great Water Body programs and is focused on the protection and restoration of the health and productivity of the Gulf of Mexico. GMD activities are centered around voluntary partner-driven projects. All projects funded must focus on at least one of the four EPA Gulf of Mexico goals. They are improving water quality, restoring habitat, enhancing community resilience, and increasing environmental education and outreach. All projects GMD funds must take place in the Gulf of Mexico watershed and are typically focused on one or more of the 5 Gulf states. There are some instances, especially for our nutrient and trash-focused projects, in which GMD funds projects in the non-Gulf states of the Gulf of Mexico watershed. You should read the funding opportunity for specific project location eligibility. The link to GMD's webpage is www.epa.gov/Gulf of Mexico. On this page, you can find a link to the story map pictured here and find information on previously funded projects. So what's new with this RFA? If you're familiar with other funding opportunities from GMD, you will notice that this one is a little bit different. This RFA has 4 funding opportunities within it. The 4 opportunities are improving community health through microbial source tracking, trash-free waters preventing more, picking up less, building community resilience through the reduction and prevention of non-point source pollution, and STEM career development for high school-aged youth. Each of these funding opportunities has a specific funding opportunity number in the right column. When you submit your application, it is very important that it is submitted to the correct funding opportunity number. So where should one start? Well, first, read the RFA and submit all the requirements in the RFA. It sounds silly, but many applications received by GMD appear that the applicant has not read the RFA or the requirements in the RFA. The only portion that may not be relevant to you is Appendix A. This section is more relevant if you have not submitted an application at grants.gov in the last couple of years. Next, make sure your organization has a DUNS number and a current registration with the System for Award Management at www.sam.gov/SAM. Both of these items are required to apply for a federal grant, and the process for obtaining them could take a month or longer. Not obtaining these in time is not an allowable reason for a late application to be accepted, so please double check this as soon as possible. Plan your project. When developing your project idea, please keep the following in mind. The project should be developed with partner and community involvement. Both of these items will be evaluated. The project must meet the priorities of the funding opportunity for which you apply. Any projects that do not meet these will be rejected. Your project must be relevant to the Gulf and the EPA Strategic Plan goals. As you are planning your project, be sure to consider the quantifiable results you expect from your project and how those will be identified in your application. After you've worked with the appropriate partners to develop the project and project details, you are ready to write your project narrative. To approach this, utilize the project narrative format found in Section 4C of the RFA. This provides a format for the summary information page and the project work plan. Pictured on this slide is the format for just the summary page information. We suggest you use these formats to ensure you cover everything that will be evaluated. Be sure to review the RFA for the full project narrative format and any cautionary information. For two sections in the project work plan format, which are project design and environmental results, you will also need to look for and integrate the specific requirements that are in each funding opportunity. Those specific requirements are found in sections 1E1-1E4. Tips to keep in mind when writing your project narrative are: use succinct, meaningful sentences. Please do not include unnecessary or irrelevant information not requested in the contents of submission section for the project narrative. Readability. Font should be no smaller than Calibri 11 point and margin should not be smaller than 1 inch. The project narrative should be a maximum of 12 pages. This includes 1 page for summary information and a project work plan of up to 11 pages. Please note any excess pages will not be reviewed. Maps, charts, pictures, and other figures required in the funding opportunity must be included in the project narrative but will not be counted against the 12-page limit. For project details, please include funding-specific information that is required for each. Likewise, for the environmental results section, each funding opportunity requires specific results, including outputs and outcomes. Remember, outputs are activities or deliverables from the project, and outcomes are the long-term environmental results. There should be quantitative, meaningful results, or your project will be less favorably reviewed and possibly not evaluated. For collaboration and plans, demonstrate partners or collaborators via this section, but make sure you include letters of support with partners committing to what is described in the project narrative. The budget narrative should only include information not easily understandable in a budget table, or that requires additional information for a specific budget category. Examples are listed in 4C under the budget narrative, but include things like 1. Description of the roles and responsibilities of personnel, if not described in other parts of the narrative. 2. A description of what the supplies will be used for and what it might entail. For example, monitoring supplies may include replacement probes and standards. 3. A description of the contract details, such as whether the contract will be competed or whether it will be sole source and how that decision was made. And 4. A description of activities of a subawardee. Next, we will discuss developing your budget table. Following the Healthy and Resilient Gulf 2021 link on GMD's webpage, there is a recommended budget table template, which is pictured on this slide. Utilizing this template in conjunction with the budget narrative will ensure the application has all of the information needed to evaluate the budget section of the project. This budget table provides more detail on the cost identified on the SF424A form. The budget object class category amounts listed on your SF424A should match the budget object class category totals on your detailed budget table. For more information on developing your budget, please see EPA's Budget Development Guidance at www.epA.gov/sites/applicant-budget-development-guidance.pdf. Requested funding should be in alignment with anticipated results, meaning an applicant should not request the maximum amount just because the maximum amount is available. Now that your project narrative and project budget are complete, look at the evaluation criteria in Section 5A. For each evaluation criteria, compare your project narrative and project budget to the corresponding section. Be sure that there is a response for each of the identified evaluation criteria and that what you've included in your project narrative and budget is sufficient information to support a good evaluation for each of the criteria. For the programmatic capability evaluation criteria in Section 5A-6A, if you've never received a federal grant of the same size and scope, list any federal grant you've received. If you have never received a federal grant, you will receive at least half points for this section if you provide an answer stating that you've never had a grant. If you skip or fail to provide any information for any of the evaluation criteria, you will get a 0 for any section skipped. The table on this slide shows the point value of each evaluation section. It is very important that you read the criteria identified in Section 5A and provide sufficient detail in the narrative and budget for each to be evaluated. Next, we will discuss submitting your application. Refer to Section 4C for detailed instructions for each required document that is shown on this table. These documents include the SF-424, or Application for Federal Assistance, the SF-424A with the budget information, EPA Form 5700-54, the Key Contacts Form, EPA Form 4700-4, or the Pre-Award Compliance Review Report. Of course, the project narrative, which includes the summary information page, the work plan, the detailed budget narrative, and if any maps, charts, and figures are included, and the budget table, resumes or CVs of principal investigators, negotiated indirect cost agreement rate, and letters of support. The exception to this list is the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. This should only be included if you have a negotiated rate. If you are not requesting indirect cost, or you are requesting the 10% federal de minimis, you will not have to submit a supporting document for number 8. So how does the selection process work? Proposals are due as stated in the RFA, which is August 6 of 2021. EPA initially conducts a threshold eligibility review, where they will look at each project to make sure it's eligible. The threshold eligibility criteria can be found in Section 3F. You will be notified if your project is deemed ineligible. If deemed ineligible, the project will not be reviewed further. Then the EPA review committees will score and rank all eligible proposals. EPA will then notify applicants that were selected sometime around October of 2021. Unsuccessful applicants will also be notified at that time. Then applicants are expected to submit a full funding package to EPA's GMD office in November of 2021. After internal review, it will be submitted to the regional office for additional review and then the final award. Grant awards are expected early in calendar year 2022, and then after that, projects may begin. On this slide, you will find helpful resources, which includes 2 links. The first is to GMD's website, which has a link to the Healthy and Resilient Gulf of Mexico 2021 RFA. That website again is www.epa.gov/Gulf of Mexico. Here you will find the RFA itself, a question and answer section, this video presentation, and the common errors to avoid document. The second link is www.epa.gov/grants, and that is a link to the grants webpage. That webpage provides additional resources for EPA grant applicants and recipients, including multiple trainings. Thank you for listening to this presentation. GMD hopes it will be useful as you begin planning your project. If you still have questions after listening to this presentation, reading the RFA, and reviewing both the question and answer and common errors documents, please email gmp-rfp@epa.gov. Thank you very much.